In January 2003, Laura Bush invited poets from around the country to a gathering at the White House to honor Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, and Langston Hughes. Poets Against the War began when Laura Bush invited Sam Hamill to the White House. I also received an invitation from Laura Bush to attend a symposium on American voices. Sam invited 50 of his closest friends to use the occasion to speak out against the administration's policies that seemed to be leading us to war.
I think they thought that we could actually go to the White House and they could do their little presentation to honor Walt Whitman and Langston Hughes and Emily Dickinson without any political fallout. It's a stupid, naive, virtually illiterate way of thinking. Anybody who's ever read Whitman or Langston Hughes knows that these were men who were outspoken in their devotion to our Constitution, to the democracy, and to human dignity. All of those things have enormous political implication. They were overtly political poets. In the midst of preparing a big event in San Francisco to honor the life and work of Kenneth Rexroth, the great poet, I took a little break and ran to the post office to get my mail. And there was a large cream-colored square envelope with the White House in gold in the upper left-hand corner. I knew what it was because there's no other reason I would get anything like that from the White House. And I felt queasy. It was more about how best to respond, in what way to say no. Should I simply write a polite letter and decline, or should I speak from my conscience? I really felt that I had to make my position known and to state it pretty clearly, that I would invite my fellow poets to stand beside me, as many as wished to, because I invited poets to speak from their conscience. Poets tend to be humanists, and they tend to see things from angles that other people don't pause long enough to look at. And I sent the letter off to about 3 dozen friends, and the poems began coming in and the word began going out.
Sam sent me an email and said, I'm going to the White House and I want to present some poems against the war because it's impossible for me to just stand up and pretend that this war is not going forward and is not going on. And I want to make some sort of statement on behalf of all the people in the nation, and I want the poets to be able to do it.
Fill the air with poems so thick, even bombs can't fall through.
Laura Bush, on, we think, hearing some kind of news about what was happening in response to her invitation, canceled the event, and she canceled it very quickly. The symposium's cancellation drew intense media attention. By that time, Poets Against the War had thousands and thousands of poems. We wanted those voices to be heard. Poets Against the War put out a call for readings to happen on February 12th. We put out the call, and hundreds of readings were organized all over the world in little tiny towns in New Mexico, in Washington State, in Ohio, and we would keep getting emails from people. They felt a sense of connection that they too could join, not just by submitting poems, but by organizing readings in their communities.
And I think Emily's so office and she's coming back somewhere.
On the day that the symposium was supposed to happen, on February 12th, I organized a group of poets from the Washington, D.C. area. I began just with one poet who called another poet who called another poet.
It is our hope and conviction that the true American voice, conveyed in part and without historical precedent by the poets of this country, may help to avert a disaster of tragic proportions.
So we gathered in front of the White House to read our poems. It was an extremely cold, windy day. Some very distinguished poets from Washington, D.C. joined us. We felt that it was important that even though the symposium had been canceled, that we raise our voices in front of the White House.
Vigil for comrades swiftly slain, vigil I never forget, how as day brightened, I rose from the chill ground and folded my soldier well in his blanket and buried him where he fell.
It was a very snowy night. There was something like 2 feet of snow on the ground at that time, and they got several thousand people to come and listen to poets read their poems. There was a very lively and feisty atmosphere.
All of you here tonight on this beautiful snowy evening, welcome to Poets Not Fit for the White House.
Club's called Sheepherder Coffee. I used to like Sheepherder coffee, a cup of grounds in my old enameled pot, then 3 cups of water in a fire, and when it's hot, boiling into froth, a half cup of cold water to bring the grounds to the bottom. It was strong and bitter and good as I squatted on the riverbank under the great redwoods all those years ago. Some days it was nearly all I got. I was happy with my dog and cases of books in my funky truck. But when I think of that posture now, I can't help but think of Palestinians huddled in their ruins, the Afghani shepherd with his bleeding goats, the widow weeping, sending off her sons, the Tibetan monk who can't go home. There are fewer names for coffee than for love. Squatting, they drink, thinking, waiting for whatever comes.